Dr. John Bishop, Executive Director of Forge. John, what is Forge?
Yeah, Forge is an organization that fundamentally fights for the family, but we do so with a strategic emphasis on men. Okay, so a lot of people today are aware of the crisis of masculinity, you might call it. That is, you might kind of have a sense that there aren't maybe quite as many good men in the world as there were in previous times, and there's actually sociological data to back that up. That when it comes to incarceration rates, when it comes to for people who are religious, participation in any form of Christianity is way down in our world today. Same thing with male education rates, same things with male job performance. And so what Forge does is we emphasize men, not because we're chauvinistic, but because we see men as kind of the weakest part right now, society-wide, of the family, and that there's importance in strengthening that. So that's what we do at Forge is we build up, we say men, marriages, and families. We do that through small groups, through mentorship, through large events, and through producing curriculum.
Give us more of a rundown of those individual ways that you help men and families in these areas.
Yeah. So at Forge, there's kind of two broad components. So one of those components is we do a lot of things on the ground in person with people, primarily in Des Moines, Iowa, which is where I live and where our first Forge location is kind of playing out. We'll open up new cities in the years to come. But one of the things that we do here is we organize a lot of small groups for men. So the average American male in today's world feels isolated. And that's, again, not just an opinion. Rates at which people feel like that, the number of close friends, for example, that people in society have today has absolutely plummeted in comparison to what it was in the 1960s, 1970s, even the 1980s. People feel isolated, which was kind of the whole motivation for the Surgeon General's 2023 report on loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness in our country. And so one of the things we do in Forge is we do small groups. So we organize small groups of men. We think there's a sweet spot around 5 to 8 men that meets 2 to 4 times a month, just going through life together. So talking about difficulties that they might face. We work primarily with fathers, in their marriages, in their efforts to bring their kids up, the headwinds that they take on against the kind of the contemporary culture, and against fatherhood, and anything in between. One thing that we're also passionate about, in addition to small groups, is what we call intergenerational community. So we oftentimes take men who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s and make them mentors to guys who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. As has been documented by Hilary Putnam in his great book, Bowling Alone, the various different generations in American life today are oftentimes isolated from their generational counterparts. So you've got people in their teens not talking to people in their 30s, people in their 50s not talking to people in their 20s. Human beings are meant to live in intergenerational community, and Forge tries to rebuild that through mentorship. The other thing that we do on occasion is we will throw large events. So we have, for example, a big conference coming up here in 3 weeks. Listeners can find out more about it if you go to www.myforge.org and check out our conference. We're going to have over 1,000 men together at a conference center, growing as most of them Catholic, but also just generally Christian men, to be better husbands, better fathers, or for the young guys, better future husbands and fathers. And we do those large group events mostly because of the professional grade formation that we can offer to people, but also because those large group events kind of launch people into small group experiences. Okay. So we do that. The very last thing that I'll say is that's probably most pertinent to our listeners today is we make curriculum. So again, if you go to www.myforge.org, you can see 3 online courses that we've produced since we launched just about a year ago. And what we do in those courses is we'll take a team, usually of about 25 psychologists, sociologists, just experienced husbands and fathers, and tackle a particular issue alongside those guys. The 3 courses that we've done thus far, the first is it's just called Fathers and Sons, and it's on the healthy sexual formation of young men. So what does it mean to be a dad and to raise a sexually healthy son? We dive into that topic in Fathers and Sons. The second one is called Home Church, and what it does is it examines religious trends over the last 3 generations of American life and isolates those qualities that have kind of risen to the top as the qualities of families that are most successful in passing the faith from one generation to the next. So that second course, which we call Home Church, fundamentally answers the question, how does one pass the faith from one generation to the next? And then the final course, called Patriarchs, says, okay, what role might a grandfather play in passing the faith to future generations? So 3 courses thus far: Fathers and Sons, Home Church, and Patriarchs. Certainly commend it to all of your listeners to give a listen.
That's how I heard about y'all. I heard that they're very good and they lead to good discussions too. And if y'all ever do a course on saving your family from digital destruction, let me know. Maybe I can be a keynote speaker for that one.
Yeah. It's something that we're really passionate about. I actually, just an hour before recording this podcast, I had a conversation with a guy named Dr. Leonard Sachs, who is a New York Times bestselling author. He's written a lot on parenting, raising boys and raising girls in the midst of a digitally saturated culture. And he's been a big proponent of and contributor to our courses. And gosh, like the difficulties that adolescents, that very young children face today, in the midst of our social media, iPhone saturated culture, is really just horrific. Everything from, lower relational skills and, ability to function in a healthy cognitive way, to pornography exposure and everything in between. iPhones are just a kind of Trojan horse, that seem to bring so many evil things into the family, into the lives of our young boys and young girls. So thanks to you, Dr. D'Souza, for what you're doing. It's critical work.
Thanks, man. I always thought I was doing critical work, but it feels good to hear that from someone else. Yeah. I'm being sarcastic. I know it doesn't come out of my tone of voice, but I'm being a little bit sarcastic here. Okay. Well, that's great work that you're doing. I'm wondering, what is the genesis of this? Who started this organization?
Yeah. So Forge right now is, I guess we're about 15 months old. So a year and some change.
Y'all have done a lot in 15 months.
Hey, appreciate that. Yeah. So I started the organization. We had our first event in November of 2023.
Dude, congrats, man! You started this thing. It's really has a really professional image.
Hey, I appreciate that, man. Yeah. Thanks for everything for engaging it. Yeah. So gosh, how did it get going? So I had the idea for Forge one night when my wife and we'd come home from a date, and she just asked me a question, that really changed my life. Pretty simple question. But she just said, John, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And I said, well, to be honest, babe, I think I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, because I loved what I did. At the time, I was working for a major Catholic nonprofit that worked with college students. It's called Focus, stands for Fellowship of Catholic University Students. And so I was more or less a jack of all trades, working at their headquarters in Denver, Colorado. And anyway, she kind of just got me thinking, and she really pressed me. She says, John, no, really, if you could do anything at all, what would you do? And I said, I love the idea, and I've really enjoyed working with college students. But if I could fight really any fight, for our times, I think I would fight the fight for the family. College students are certainly important. But I felt drawn to sort of lay my life down, at least to lay my profession down, in the service to the family. And I was convicted that if we were really going to serve the family, just like I said at the beginning of this call, kind of the weakest element of the family at the time, and still to the present day, is fathers, given declining rates of fatherhood, both in society at large and certainly in the church. If you pair the fact that dads are doing so poorly with another fact, which is that fathers are perhaps the number one predictor of faithfulness in the next generation. That is, if you want to figure out whether or not a kid is someday going to be faithful as a Christian Catholic adult, the best single factor that you can look at is the faith of that child's father. So you have men in droves leaving the church, leaving the family. And then the number one predictor of faithfulness in the next generation is, what a kid's father looks like. That's a bad, juxtaposition of factors. Double whammy. Yeah. And so, I was like, yeah, we're going to found an organization. It's going to be kind of like Focus on the Family, Dr. James Dobson's organization that makes a lot of great content, supports him, but Forge is fundamentally a movement kind of like another Focus, the Focus of the Fellowship of Catholic University students. So I say Forge is kind of a blend of two foci, the Focus on the Family and Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University students, but everything that we do is in service of the family. And we do that with a strategic emphasis on men. We got it going. We've had a really rapid start. What we've done in a little over a year is, to be honest, more than we expected to do. And it seems just to be growing more quickly, with each passing month. Certainly encourage people to get a taste of it, take a look at what we're doing online. If you happen to be in the Midwest and you want to come out for a great conference, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but on March 1st of 2025, you can see the conference. If it doesn't air until after our conference, then February 28th of 2026, we'll have our next conference. And very excited to introduce people to Forge at those large events.
From a business perspective, what led to your success? Did you get some initial funding or some initial breaks? How did you grow so quickly?
Yeah. So, we were blessed with we're a nonprofit. We run 95% off donations. And there was a number of people local here, mostly in the Des Moines area, that really wanted to see the organization stand up. And so through the generosity of about 100 donors, we were able to put together about $600,000 and get it off the ground. And so I'm grateful to the donors that made it possible, for us to get started. And thanks be to God, it seems like our funding is increasing. So that was a big factor for sure, and how we got started. And as we continue, though, it seems naturally that a bigger and bigger portion of our financial pie is coming from non-donor sources. And so we anticipate that at our maturity, say when we're 3 to 5 years in, that we'll have about a 50-50 split of revenue coming in from donations and revenue coming in from the sale of premium content resources, on the ground experiences, what have you. So that's how we work.
So what's your vision with this long term?
Yeah. So we want to have Forge chapters in hundreds of cities throughout the entire world. So in 2026, we will found 2 more cities. We'll have paid staff in those cities. Going forward, I am not quite at liberty to say yet what those cities are, but we're at over 90% where we'll be. One in the Midwest, one likely on the East Coast. What we hope to do in those cities is the same thing that we've done here in Des Moines, is to have an ever expanding group of fathers fundamentally who are investing in their families and leading them into what we call the Tao. Tao, T-A-O, stands for families that are thriving in a human sense, apostolic, that is, they love their faith and they want to lead other people into it, and they're orthodox, that is, they're speaking from a Catholic perspective here. They're obedient to 100% of the Catholic Church's teachings without any exceptions. So that's what we're all about. We're all about the Tao, thriving apostolic and Orthodox families, and fathers who are empowered to positively contribute to their family's success in that way.
How can we 10x your growth?
Yeah. There's really 2 things. One, if there's anybody listening to this podcast who's a person of means, donations are always helpful. Second thing is we need good people, so I've been really blessed in the 2 cities that we're almost certainly expanding to in 2026. I've got really talented people that are willing to not work for nothing, but take what would maybe be a career in that would make them very, very wealthy, and live essentially a middle class life working for a nonprofit. And so good people are a big part of the picture. I need one talented staff person in each city. And I guess, I'll throw one final thing in there. If you're just listening to this podcast and you're like, gosh, what can I do to help out? Well, really simply, you can get online and you can get a taste for what it is we're doing. So if you go to www.myforge.org, to give it to you one more time, click on courses, buy a course, take it. Better yet, get a group of men together and take the course in a group. The more people that we have getting online, taking our stuff, suggesting it to other people, getting the message out, that's incredibly helpful.
Okay, let's get a little preview. I wonder if you can say one tip that listeners would get from each one of those courses that you mentioned.
Yeah, this is great. So I'll start with the first one. So Fathers and Sons is, like we said, fundamentally a course that answers a really simple question. How do I raise a sexually healthy son? And that's a question that a lot of dads feel very powerfully, right? Say you're a Christian dad, you're a Catholic dad, you're convicted of the Church of our Lord's teachings on chastity, on marriage being between one man and one woman, so on and so forth.
Wait, what?
But
Wait, what'd you just say?
Marriage is between one man and one woman. Yeah.
Okay.
You're convicted of those things, but you see that our culture preaches a little different view of marriage, of sexuality. What can you do to bring your son up? Well, I'll give two things here. So the first thing, and this is going to sound simple, but I'll unpack it. Dads need to talk to their sons about sexuality. It's amazing to me how many very devout, intentional, intelligent dads I meet, who also grew up in, say, really Catholic families, whose fathers never spoke to them about sexuality at all. Like if it came through either through their mom or through kids on the street, and who now, as they're going through the journey of raising their own kids, don't talk to their own children about sexuality, particularly their sons. And it's critical. It's so helpful if sons hear about sexuality, not from their mom, not from their friends, but from another male in the family, specifically from their father. Okay. And when you talk to your son about sexuality, it shouldn't be a one and done thing. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of times we talk about the talk, right? So it's the proverbial time when, dads awkwardly sit down with their kids to explain the birds and the bees. And for many of us, that's, one conversation, the talk, if you will, is just that. It's a single standalone event in a child's life. What we really, really emphatically encourage fathers to do is to not have a single conversation, but to carve a channel of communication, from them to their sons. And over the course of the Fathers and Sons series, we go through each age demographic and say, hey, how can you talk not just to a 13-year-old boy about the birds and the bees, but how can you talk to your 6-year-old in a way that protects their innocence, kind of alerts them to things like pornography, but also doesn't say things that perhaps they're not yet ready to hear, How do you talk to a 9-year-old? How do you talk to a 10-year-old? How do you talk to a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, so on and so forth? So that's one piece of advice is carve a channel of communication with your kids about sexuality. And then second, especially when it comes to raising boys, don't do it alone. Before I founded Forge, I did my doctorate in theology at the Catholic University of America. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the crisis of men and masculinity in the church and in the culture and what to do about it. One thing that I'm struck by in our culture is that though we seem to be sort of hypersexual in a certain way, one thing that we don't celebrate is the unique differences between men and women. there are unique differences. It goes straight to our biology to show that, men are different than women, and young boys and young girls have different needs. One need that boys have, and they have it very, very powerfully, is they need to, for the culture, for their community to recognize them, not just as a good person, but specifically as a man. Okay. That's why across time and place, from, 3,000 years ago in Papua New Guinea to fraternities, in 2025, United States of America, you see boys doing things like initiation rites that kind of give a witness, if you will, to their manhood. If we in churches and in educational institutions aren't willing to call boys into an elevated kind of masculinity, to usher them into groups of, say, faithful Catholic Christian men, then boys will look for other groups of people to recognize them in their masculinity. One of the best things that you can do as a dad is to raise your son amongst a group of men that you can usher your son into. And that can look as simple as, gosh, you're having a barbecue on Saturday afternoons and you have 5 good men come over for that barbecue, bring their families. But when you're sitting around in the man circle around the grill and your 15-year-old boys across the yard, just go ahead and clear a little space in that man circle. Bring him in. From very, very small things to really, really big things, usher your son into a community of good men. He needs that. And it's really, really important for him in his psychological development. So that's fathers and sons. I'm going to hit patriarchs and home church kind of in one fell swoop here. One of the things that was a little bit disarming for me when I was working with a team of scholars and putting together the Home Church and Patriarchs series, just a reminder, these courses, what they do, they talk about passing the faith to future generations. Was seeing in the data part, the study that I'm leaning on the most here is a study published by Oxford University Press by a guy named Vern Bankston called Faith and Families. And to this day, it's the most thoroughgoing academic study ever performed on faith transmission from one generation to the next. This study isolated qualities of families that are successful in passing the faith to future generations. And here are a few of the things that the study found. One, families that are willing to be actively countercultural in their religious practice are more successful at passing the faith to future generations than families that actively go out of their way to try and integrate the culture into their family. It's like almost as if families that say, like, look, the truth is the truth. What I believe, to be true, I'm going to live my life in accord with it. The culture plays by my rules. I don't play by the culture's rules. They just win. Okay. Countercultural families are better at passing on the faith than those that actively seek to just sort of like go with the whims of the culture. That said, families that live in a countercultural way and isolate themselves, they don't do very well at all. So let's just say that you're a family, you're Christian, you're living you're leading your family in a way that is at odds with the culture. One of the best things that you can do, and this is right in line with the Fathers and Sons series, is to find other like-minded families and do tons of things together. Be countercultural, but don't be isolated. All right. So live counterculturally, but live in a countercultural community, not a countercultural island. Okay. Another thing that these authors came back to over and over again is that more than any particular doctrine, that you might pass on to your kids need to live in a family culture that they, when they become adults, would describe as, and I quote here, warm. Okay, so it's really interesting that children who grow up, despite having really intelligent, successful parents who maybe even witness to the faith in a really attractive way, if those parents raise their kids in a way that the kids, upon becoming adults, describe as kind of cold, as distant, as a rule, they leave the faith of their upbringing. Okay. A lot of people, when they see that part of the study, they think, okay, gosh, well, if my kids really need warmth from me. They need to see, me welcoming them in the, to have a warm attitude towards them. Then maybe I shouldn't be a disciplinarian. Well, actually, exactly the opposite is the case. That there's a way in which having firm boundaries for your kids, being strict, when your kids need you to be strict, being welcoming when they need you to be welcoming, those boundaries are kind of like the way that we describe it in the course. They're almost like the kind of the metal ring that you would place around a fire pit, right? That ring around the fire, those boundaries, if you will, keep the fire alive in a way. Because if the ring didn't exist, then the fire would just spread out, over the entire landscape and burn everything to a crisp and kind of sap the life out of a family, right? So warmth and kind of being a strong disciplinarian, those are two synergetic factors that are incredibly conducive to faith transmission. Families that are able to simultaneously, paradoxically, be very, very vibrantly warm in their relationships with their children and with one another, and also hold strict disciplinary boundaries, those are the families that are most successful in passing on the faith to their kids. So there's a few little things from the courses for you. A lot more very specific things. If you want to hop on, again, it's www.myforge.org. Check them out.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah, I wonder if the part of the crisis of masculinity is due to the increased feminization of culture. A wise man once told me that you and I don't realize how feminist and woke we are just by being part of this culture. And men need to man up. They're not taking the helm of the ship. They're not taking the role as head of the family. And I see this over and over again, talking about digital destruction, because the mom is concerned that their child is going to be left out at school. So that's why the kid gets the phone. The dad knows it's a terrible idea, but he's not stepping up. Who's running the family here? Who's protecting the child? So I don't know how we can get this message out to men. Maybe you do it at your conference, but you gotta grow up and get some hair on your chest and suck it up and be a man.
Yeah. It's really astonishing. I recently read a book. I'm sure you're familiar with it as well. So Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
Where he just lays out in very kind of in your face, clear detail, the fact that, particularly with young girls, but young boys too, what a horrible effect, smartphones and social media and the pairing of those two things together, have on our young girls and our young boys. And one of the things I was listening to a podcast interview with Jonathan Haidt the other day, and he was talking about how many of the parents that he speaks to, they know that these things are bad for their kids, but they cave to the quote pressure, from
like
their
the inmates are running the prison.
That's right.
Who's leading this family? Y'all?
Right. Yeah.
And then they come to me once it's a irrevocable disaster. They want to pay me hundreds of dollars an hour to fix their family. Hey, you could have done this for free using common sense 10 years ago. Yeah.
So, and it's just astounding. Jonathan Haidt is an atheist. He's not doing this from a religiously, back perspective, but just from simple scientific observations that, as you said, you hardly even need scientific data for. It's just common sense. Don't let your child, right, have unfiltered access to the internet 24/7 through a smartphone. Should not be a contentious position. It shouldn't be one that we even need to consult scientific. The scientific data, is there, in spades. So if you want to go ahead and look at it, read The Anxious Generation, read, Leonard Sachs, read so many other figures. I'm sure you could, really get, give us the data as well, Dr. D'Souza, but it's just like, gosh, your kids need you. Speaking specifically to fathers here, to be a man. And if you're not, they will suffer the consequences. Oftentimes when we talk to men, we say, men are hardwired to be protectors. They are, and I can talk to you for a long time about the psychological scientific data that backs that up. What do they need to be protected from? What do kids need to be protected from, that is, by their fathers? Well, in today's world, it's not like there's like a physical lion for most of us standing outside our door. It's not, our Neanderthal, humanoid predecessors might have had to protect their tribe, if you will, from a different kind of physical predator. Kids today need protection from the digital world, maybe more than anything else. And if you're going to call yourself a provider and a protector, then that is perhaps the chief thing that you need to protect your kids from, maybe more than anything else. In today's world, it is so malicious. It is so detrimental. It has negative effects psychologically, negative effects on intelligence quotient, negative effects on a child's ability to relate, negative effects on the child's eventual ability to focus and perform well on the job, negative effects, on your family's ability to bond with one another. It is like only bad with almost no good. Why do we just roll over and let ourselves be sort of succumb to the whims of 13-year-old girls and boys? Our kids need to be protected from these things that are a net enormous negative with almost no positives. So,
Awesome speech, dude. We're going to clip that one. That clip is going to go viral right there. So many good quotes. Hey, you need a podcast. You need to get these quotes out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, thank you. Yep. Yeah.
Well, you have some sons, John?
Yeah. So my wife and I have 3 children. Hope we have more.
Congrats.
But yeah, I have two of those 3 are boys. So they're all young now. A 4-year-old, 2.5, and a 1-year-old. So,
well, they're blessed to have you.
Yeah, I'm blessed to have them. So, yeah, very grateful.
Thanks for the chat, Dr. John Bishop.
Okay, appreciate it. And again, listeners, www.myforge.org. I'm Dr. D'Souza. I appreciate you having me on today.
Welcome.